Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the April Recreational Astronomy Night Meeting online version of the Toronto Centre RASC. My name is Paul Markov. I will be your virtual host this evening. I hope you're doing well and managing through these unusual times. The Toronto Centre decided to move forward with virtual meetings in order to stay in touch with our membership. So here we are, about to start our first official online recreational astronomy night meeting. We've had a couple of other similar online meetings this past month, and things worked out really well. Thanks to our technical team comprised of Andrew and Betty Reed, Blake Nancaro, Ward LeGros, and Ennio Cellucci. This evening, we have three speakers, as we usually do for these meetings. First up is Chris Vaughan presenting the sky this month. Next, Phil Groff will introduce himself as our new RASC Executive Director. And finally, Jerry Vila will talk to us about Johannes Kepler. And then finally, our President, Chou, will close the meeting with a few announcements as usual. A couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions, please enter them in the chat line. You can find that on the right-hand side of the video window. And Blake will ask the speakers the questions on your behalf. And something else, if you are attending a Toronto Centre meeting for the first time, if you can, please let us know through the chat messaging as well, as we keep track of how many new participants we have attending the meetings. So without further ado, we'll get started. We'll take a moment to get set up, and Chris will be right back. We're good to go? All right. I'm told we're good to go. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Hey, everybody. I'm going to cover what's going on in the sky for the next calendar month, basically. Normally, it's 50-50, half a month and half a month, but the way these meetings have worked out, it's essentially last couple of days of April and nearly all of May. So let's get started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in space exploration, and then I'll review a little bit of cool historical information about this month in history, and then I'll get into the observing aspects of what we can look at this month in terms of daylight, nighttime, sun and moon motions, what the planets are up to, maybe something about those comets you might have heard about in the news, checking out some ISS satellite passes, and then some suggestions for spring observing from your driveway, since we're all kind of sticking close to home with our telescopes these days. And once this is all through, I'm going to take the content of this talk and upload it to the RASC-TO website for anybody to grab the notes that I've got put together there. So in case anybody wants to nod off during the talk, I'll just give you some the big bullet points ahead of time. And that is that tonight, after the meeting, if it's clear where you are and the moon is up in your sky, head on out and look for the lunar X. I'll come back and talk more about that. May 2nd is Astronomy Day. It's been delayed this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. May 6th, we have the peak of the Eta Aquarids meteor shower. And then that fun time when the moon passes the morning planets is going to happen on from about May 11th to 16th. I'll review that with you. May 14th brings us the last quarter moon and the return of galaxy season part 2. So we had a turn in April, and now we get another shot at galaxies in May. And then keep your eye in the evening sky on May 21 for Mercury close to Venus. In terms of space exploration, most launches that we're accustomed to tuning in for are a little bit TBD right now. They are happening, but we're not always exactly sure when they're going to take place. But what we do know is that SpaceX have announced that they're planning to launch their Crew Dragon capsule on a test flight to the ISS and back, the International Space Station, on May 27th. And that's going to feature two astronauts on board, Bob and Doug. Not the Bob and Doug McKenzie, but Douglas Hurley and Robert Behnken. And NASA has actually announced that there will be no in-person viewing of this launch. So you won't be able to drive onto the property or sit in the stands for this launch. So they're doing their part for social distancing. Not to be outdone, well, there's a picture of the inside of the capsule, very futuristic looking, as you'd expect from Elon Musk and gang. But not to be outdone, we have the Chinese planning to launch their crew capsule, possibly as early as May 5th or sometime in the next little bit. And that'll be using a Long March 5B rocket from Wenchang in China. And this will be an uncrewed test flight. So they're going to launch and then they're going to do a high-speed reentry. They have a new heat shield that they're planning to test with this flight. And this system of theirs is actually configurable in a light and a heavy version. And they're launching the heavy version, which is designed for a deep space exploration that's beyond low Earth orbit. This one can actually sit 6 persons or 3 with 500 kilograms of cargo. And this is a picture of it being assembled. So that's kind of neat that progress in the human spaceflight domain. This month in history, looking at astro birthdays, we've got on May 1st, in 1825, the birthday of Johann Jakob Balmer, and he's a Swiss mathematician who's credited with formulating the calculations of the spectral emission lines of hydrogen, including our favorite one to look at the sun with, the hydrogen alpha line at 656.28 nanometers. That series of lines is one of about 6 different series that are possible in the solar spectrum. On May 10th, 1900, we had the birthday of Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, and she's a pioneering British-American astronomer. She was the first woman to receive a PhD from Harvard's Radcliffe College, and then went on to work at the Harvard Observatory for many, many years. At Harvard, she surveyed all the stars in the sky brighter than 10th magnitude, or at least visible from the Harvard Observatory, and millions of variable stars. And that data that she compiled set the foundations of the stellar evolution studies and stellar classification that went on at Harvard University. Interesting note, she also supervised the PhD of Helen Sawyer-Hogg and a number of other students while at Harvard. And Helen Sawyer-Hogg went on to return to Canada and work at the David Dunlop Observatory. If you're interested in reading more about the Harvard Observatory, I recommend highly this book, The Glass Universe by Davis Sobel. And it's a fascinating story of the history of sort of modern astronomy science. Also from Harvard Observatory, we have the birthday of Williamina Fleming back in 1857, and she worked there as well, cataloging more than 10,000 stars, and herself discovered 59 gaseous nebulae, including the Horsehead, many variable stars, and 10 novae. And more women in astronomy. We're celebrating the birthday on May 16th of Nancy Roman, the mother of the Hubble Space Telescope. So she was one of the early executives at NASA and later went on to work in radio astronomy at the Naval Research Lab. Here she is at the telescope, and here she is standing beside a small scale model of the HST. It's actually much bigger than that in real life. On May 17th, we have Sir Joseph Norman Lockyer. He coined the term chromosphere and discovered helium in the sun's spectrum. And way back in 1048, we've got the birth of Persian poet, mathematician, astronomer, and stellar cartographer Omar Khayyam, who calculated the length of the year to 6 decimal places and created a calendar that had only 1 day's error in 5,000 years. Quite impressive. Here's a sketch of some of his work. This month in history in astronomy, back on May 1st, 1930, we have that Pluto was officially named using the suggestion of 11-year-old Venetia Burney's suggestion. And she incorporated, they liked the fact that the letters PL were in the name of Pluto because those were the initials of Percival Lowell, who initiated the search for this planet that was theorized to be out beyond Neptune. Back in 1543, Copernicus circulated his Commentariolus, or the little commentary, which described his theory of the heliocentric model of the solar system. On May 2nd, 1780, we've got William Herschel discovering the first binary star, Chi Ursae Majoris, which is down here below the back legs of the Great Bear. And then on May 3rd, we've got Hedmund Halley during a total solar eclipse, which was the last one visible in London for almost 900 years. He noted seeing the phenomenon we call Baily's beads, which is the little enhanced points of light around the rim of the moon due to the valleys letting in a little bit more sunlight just before and just after the totality of the solar eclipse. On May 12, 1930, we have the very first planetarium to open in the USA. That's Chicago's Adler Planetarium. It's still there. It still looks the same, although it's got lots more stuff around it. And if you get a chance to go to Chicago, there's a little place you can go, a neat place you can go. And on May 14th, we have the first U.S. space station Skylab launched into orbit on the last working Saturn V rocket. And finally, on May 15th, 2005, Pluto's moons Nix and Hydra were discovered by Hal Weaver et al. A lot of us were wishing that those moons had been named Kirk and Spock, but the IAU didn't like that idea, so we had to go with something a little more traditional. In 1969, we have Veneris 5 and 6 to Venus, and those descended on parachutes for 51 minutes into Venus's atmosphere and recorded its composition, finding 93 to 97% CO2, 2 to 5% nitrogen, and less than 4% of oxygen. So not a fun place for human beings. Venera 6 reached a point of 11 kilometers above the surface before the signal was lost from it due to the intense conditions. All right, into observing now. So if anybody's interested in contributing to science, this organization, Globe at Night, forgive the 2015, that should be 2020, is interested in your observations on how dim the stars that you can see at your location during the periods of the month where the moon is not in the sky. So this spring, from May 14th to 23rd, they encourage everyone to head out and focus their attention on Leo and Bootes. And if you go to the website, globeatnight.org, you can find sky charts with the different number of stars for the different sky conditions. And the idea is that you try to match your sky with the closest chart that they provide you. And so you can then submit your information, and those data points will go into making maps of light pollution and tracking light pollution variance over time as well. In terms of dark skies, which is what us astronomers really like to deal with, obviously once the sun sets, the sky doesn't get dark immediately. It takes a while for it to get absolutely dark. And the term astronomical twilight is used to describe the conditions when the sun is dropped 18 degrees below the horizon. So when the sun in the evening is gone further than 18 degrees below, the astronomical twilight will commence, or the astronomical twilight will end, and the darkest sky will begin. And then night will end at the beginning of astronomical twilight the following morning. So here we are on April 29th. We've got astronomical twilight ending at 10:10 p.m. and resuming at 4:18. And for those who are interested in imaging under a dark, dark sky, that gives you about 6 hours of imaging time right now. But as we all know at this time of the year, by the end of May, a month from now, that amount of imaging time will drop to a mere 4.5 hours. So the weather's nice for stargazing in the summer, but it's not doesn't give us a lot of time for imaging. In terms of the moon, I'm not going to go into all the details here. The significant things are that we've got 5 official phases of the moon in this month, because we've got first quarter moon. The second first quarter moon during April is just going to happen tomorrow. And then we have the full moon on May 7th, last quarter on May 14th, and then the new moon on the 22nd. So that May 14th to 22nd period is going to give us dark skies in the evening, and that's when we want to go after the galaxies and the other dimmer objects that we can look at. Once our meeting's done tonight, it'll be just about the right time to head out if you've got clear skies to go look for the lunar X. So the lunar X occurs around first quarter, a few times a year, and it arises because the sun's light is arriving at the moon's terminator at a steep angle. And when the moon is at the right colongitude, it'll create a set of light and dark shadows from some crater rims that combine to produce the letter X visible on the moon. You can see it's just a bit below the moon's equator here on the terminator. So there's that. It's produced by the craters named Purbach, Lacaille, and Blanchinus. And that phenomenon is due to peak right around 10 p.m. Eastern time tonight. It lasts for two or so, 1.5, 2 hours on either side of that time. So you could probably get out there and capture it by, say, midnight Eastern time. And this event, because it's happening on the moon, it's going to be visible widely across the Earth. So anywhere really on Earth that has the moon in a dark sky during this sort of time, and you need to adjust for your time zone, you should be able to see that lunar X in either strong binoculars or even a backyard telescope. Now, I haven't had a chance to look, but I certainly intend to look for the lunar V. The lunar V is produced up here near the northern hemisphere of the moon by the crater Oeckert and a couple of ridges that sort of string out almost orthogonally from it. That gives you the V. And then way down here near the bottom, there's a lunar L. And the lunar L, you can find that it's not associated with any particular craters, but if you look for this trio of craters that look like Mickey Mouse's head, right here, 2 ears and his face, then his chin sort of points down to the lunar L. Now, somebody has said that there's an E on there. I don't know. Maybe in your telescope, this little patch might look like an E if it's inverted in your telescope, so you can spell love by picking a round crater. So anyway, there's some things to look at on the moon next time you get a chance to go out tonight. So I'm going to switch over to Stellarium and talk about what's up with the planets. So let's go and switch to now. So you've all had your eye on Venus for quite some time. Venus is actually now starting to end its long apparition in the western sky and sink a little bit lower towards the sun. It'll take a few weeks to do that. But the other thing that happened to Venus is that it reached maximum brightness yesterday or the day before, I believe, of a magnitude minus 4.73. So the more negative a magnitude number, the brighter the object is. If you were able to grab a view of Venus through your telescope, you wouldn't have noticed that. I'll just center this up and zoom in for us. It's a nice little crescent shape right now. Over the next little while, Venus is actually entering the space between the sun and the Earth. Its orbit is moving it in between the sun and the Earth, heading towards inferior conjunction in the next little while. And as it does that, Venus is going to grow larger in disk size and wane in phase. You can see the crescents getting a little bit thinner as we go. So over the course of the month, Venus will be getting to a thinner and thinner crescent. And there will come a point where the Venus is just simply too close. I'm just going to bring this back into the sky here a little bit. It's going to be getting a little bit too close to the sun for risking views with a telescope. So I do caution everybody that you want to make sure that the sun is completely set below the horizon before you attempt to look at Venus with binoculars or any optical aid, telescope binoculars and so on. So as I say, you can watch sort of Venus slowly, slightly decrease in brightness for the rest of the month and then start sinking kind of sunward as it goes. And soon we'll lose its view for the time being. Now, here's the moon tonight. So the moon is going to be kind of in the spot up between Cancer and Gemini tonight. That's where, you're going to be seeing your lunar X. During the course of tonight, the moon will actually transition past the Beehive cluster, the M44 in Cancer. It's not going to be visible for us in the GTA and the most of Canada because the moon will set by the time it does that. But if you live in the Pacific region or perhaps in Asia, you'll get that opportunity to see the moon sneak just above that cluster. If you do, the moon commonly passes this cluster because the cluster is only a degree from the ecliptic, which is the moon's zone of travel, and so that these encounters of the moon and the Beehive cluster happen very frequently. that's it for planets on the moon in the evening time. Let's just actually, what we'll do is we'll follow the moon for a few days until we get to those morning planets. So here's tonight, a couple more nights. We get past to Leo, to Virgo, Libra. We're going to encounter Scorpius. So by this point, around the 5th of May, we're heading into the moon rising just about midnight. Then as we head a few more days hence, it's going to catch up to the morning planets. So here we go. You want to get up early in the morning, around mid-month, as I said at the top. You can look for a gathering of the moon, Jupiter, and Saturn before dawn. Those planets on the moon will remain in sight well into the period when the sun's about to rise. Jupiter certainly is so bright that it sort of holds its own against the encroaching twilight in the morning sky. So you should be able to pick Jupiter up for a fair bit of time on the 12th above the moon. And Saturn is a bit dimmer, so Saturn would probably fade a while before Jupiter does. So if you want to sort of set yourself up a program of observing or photographing this sort of encounter, you can start the morning before on the 11th, get the 12th, 13th. By the 14th and 15th, the moon is going to be visiting Mars. And then another about the 16th. They'll still all be kind of in the sky together. By that point, we're getting into the old crescent moon as it heads towards new moon, which occurs a few days later. Now, in the meantime, we've also got Neptune hanging around in this patch of the sky. Of course, all of these planets eventually will join our evening sky for the summer stargazing season, but for now, we're still all having to get up early in the morning to see them. The other thing that's going to happen during the course of May is, I'll just wind this back a little bit, is that Mars is actually moving faster in its orbit than Jupiter and Saturn. So you'll see Mars increase its separation from Jupiter and Saturn. But Jupiter and Saturn are going to hang out together all year long. So they'll both enter into a retrograde period next month in May. But since they're both sort of moving prograde together and then they'll be moving retrograde together for a while, they're going to remain about 6 or 7 degrees apart for the whole summer stargazing season. Mercury, let's find Mercury. So Mercury is going to enter the evening sky around mid-month, and you get a nice apparition for those of us that live in the northern hemisphere when Mercury is sitting higher than the ecliptic, which means it tends to linger in the sky for a while after the sun has gone down, giving you a bit of a dark sky to view Mercury. So you'll be able to see Mercury. Trees in my way, but that's fine. Around 9 p.m. or so, towards the latter part of May. All right. I'll come back to Stellarium in a few minutes. I want to demo some of the comets that we're going to be seeing. Let me just come back to here. And I like to keep tabs on all those wee hunks of rock that are orbiting the solar system. There's a close flyby of a fairly large one happening of the Earth next day or so. But it's many times farther away than the moon is, so nothing to worry about in terms of hitting Earth. But we do have robotic systems that monitor the sky and photograph it and find and catalog these various objects. So we have the green dots that are orbiting the sun here are the regular asteroids, minor planets, small bodies. The red ones are the ones that sort of come closer to the Earth. So already this year, we've discovered another 973 near-Earth ones, the red ones. Another 1,100 of the regular green ones. These systems have found 17 new comets in 2020 and already made 12.1 million observations. So these systems are keeping Earth safe. We're keeping tabs on what's out there that might endanger us. So if we find anything that's big and that might endanger Earth, then we carefully monitor its orbit, calculate its orbit, and determine that that we're safe. So we have 3 to 4 comets that are kind of in the news, in the sky these days. The one that was creating quite a buzz was the comet C2019 Y4 Atlas. And this one was predicted for a time to become well into the naked eye range of brightness, but unfortunately its nucleus broke up a few weeks ago, and now it's just fizzling out, basically fading. It's still visible in telescopes. It's in the early evening sky in southern Camelopardalis, and during the month it's going to descend into Perseus, and while it heads towards perihelion. But nothing really super duper to look at there. This other comet, C2017 T2 Pan-STARRS, is currently magnitude 8.5, so it's also a telescope-worthy object. It's fading, though. It's already past its peak brightness. It's highest in the sky after dusk, so the later you wait in the evening, the lower it's going to get, the tougher it's going to be to see it. And it's also up near Camelopardalis, so I'll switch over to Stellarium in a second and show you where they are. And then we have 2019 Y1 Atlas. It's also about 8.5, and it's up in the same area as well. So this one's actually going to head right into the Big Dipper's bowl and pass very close to the star Dubhe on May 20th. So that's something to keep an eye on. And the one that people are buzzing about is Comet Swan. Now, unfortunately for us, Comet Swan, which has now reportedly reached a magnitude of plus 5.5, so that's getting close to naked eye if you're out in the country away from city lights, certainly binocular brightness. But for us in the GTA, it's too low and too close to the sun really to be seen. On the 12th of May, it's going to pass 0.56 astronomical units from Earth. So 1 astronomical unit is the average distance, mean distance between the sun and the Earth. So it's basically little more than half of that distance away from Earth. It's going to reach its perihelion when the comet itself is nearest to the sun in late May, and it's predicted right now to reach a magnitude of plus 3, and that is in the naked eye range. This is a really cool image that was taken by Drill Riemann just on April 27th, but he's in Africa. He's in Namibia, where he gets a nice view of it high in the sky, and he reported that this tail, I believe, was 1.5 degrees in length in this image, so that's pretty substantial. So let me switch over to Stellarium and take a look at these. So we'll head back to tonight's sky, and let's just search for, let's do Comet Swan first. C2020 F8. Just go to the morning sky. So as you can see, it doesn't even rise until just before sunrise. So there we are. And over the next number of days, it is going to climb, but it's heading sunward. So you might, if you're lucky, if you have a low clear horizon to the east before dawn, you might be able to pick it up kind of towards the 12th or so of the month when you can get your timing just right, sort of pick it up out after about 5 a.m. Then after that, it's going to swing kind of to the other side of the sun. So, you know, if we're lucky, we might get a chance if it brightens up significantly to be able to pick it up out of the twilight, but it's really not that convenient for those of us in the GTA and the rest of Canada. Envious of those that live in southerly latitudes. All right, let's go back to tonight, and I'll switch over to C. Let's go back to here, C2017. Let's go to 2019 Y1. I'll just do one of these. What you can do in Stellarium is you can actually show the trail of an object. So I'll just wind back a little bit, and I'll just advance over the next few days. I'll just put the constellation boundaries up so you can see what we're doing. So here we are. Here's Polaris and the Little Dipper, and the path of the comet over the next month is going to take it out of Camelopardalis and pass very close to Dubhe around the 20th of May. And so you can grab your Stellarium or your Sky Safari app and track where those comets are going. All right, let's go back to here. We've got the Eta Equurids meteor shower underway. It's just a strong, broad maximum shower composed of Halley's Comet material. This one has persistent trails, a few fireballs. I think somebody posted recently a nice video of a smoke trail produced by a meteor. This one will peak before dawn on May the 6th. And the reason that you want to look for meteors before dawn is because at that point, the sky above you is plowing directly into the cloud of debris that produces those meteors, those shooting stars. Unfortunately, this one has a bit of a southerly radiant, which means that the source of the meteors, the apparent source, is fairly low in the sky for us. So half the meteors are hidden by the Earth's horizon. So we get about half the show in the north. But unfortunately, we're going to have a full moon on the peak morning. So that one will have to wait for another year to get a good show from that one. There's a picture of the radiant in Aquarius. For those that like to chase or look at the International Space Station, we've got the passes right now are in the pre-dawn, very early in the morning. They'll run until about May 16th, and then they'll transition into evening passes, and most of those will be happening because of the late sunsets. They're going to be happening quite late in the evening, so 10:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. I've noted a few possible ones to go after, but your best bet is to log into heavensabove.com or use an app that notes your location and gives you the timings of the International Space Station passes. Thanks to Blake Nancaro for sharing with me his picks of double stars for the month of May. So around the full moon every month, Blake likes to share with everybody some suggestions for double stars to go out and look at. And these are 5 that he sent me to share with you. And what I've done is create a little observing list in Sky Safari that plots a little blue circle where they are. So we've got, just bring these up, Delta Draconis, we've got Theta Virginis down here in Virgo. We've got some HD 111, 845 in Coma. Up here, we've got HD 109, 556 in Corvus. And then 6 Leo, which is down here off the bottom below Regulus. Now, constellations that we like to look at objects when they're crossing the meridian. That's when they're highest in the sky. And so what we can do is look at which constellations are on the meridian at the next time the moon is nice and dark. So around the middle of May, when we get into the last quarter moon phase, the constellations are going to be on the meridian. I'll just switch back to Stellarium here. So we can look at that. We'll just face south. And we'll switch to 15th. So around 10 p.m., just bring up the meridian here. So we've got the zenith about here. So anything in this patch of sky, which is more than about 60 degrees elevation, between 60 and 60 degrees and overhead, you'll be looking through the least amount of Earth's disturbing atmosphere. And so all of your deep sky objects will be best viewed when they're high in the sky. So around 10 p.m., we've got constellations like the eastern end of Hydra, Corvus and Crater, the western half of Virgo. We've got Leo, Coma Berenices, and Canis Venatici, and then Ursa Major. A couple of hours later, they move aside and they bring in some of Libra, Bootes. Of course, we also have Draco and Ursa Minor up here. And then by about 2 a.m., we start getting into Serpens, Caplet, and Hercules, and some of the other objects that we have there. And in terms of what you might want to pursue in the next little while, of course, galaxy season means the Virgo cluster and the patch of sky sitting here between Virgo and Leo. And what I'll do is just turn off some of these annotations. So if you're doing a Messier certificate or chasing after some of these galaxies in the Virgo cluster, it can be a little bit intimidating. My recommendation is that you take your telescope, use your widest, longest focal length eyepiece, so it gives you your widest field of view, and just try to aim your telescope exactly halfway between Denebula at the end of Leo's tail and Vindemiatrix. If you point your telescope right here, halfway between them, you're bound to hit galaxies using a wide-angle eyepiece. So first thing you probably hit is M86, M84. Those are the more prominent galaxies in the region. This is Markarian's chain. If I just take off the symbols here, you can sort of see the chain effect. Once you're here, you can start looking around, and if you're chasing Messiers, for example, you can use Stellarium to figure out which of the groups are Messiers. I'll just crank this up so we can see them. So there are 17, 18 objects in the Messier list just in this little patch as well. So once you've got yourself kind of oriented, you can look for the distinctive double galaxies of the eyes, that kind of thing, and then start navigating your way around and picking off the targets as you go. So that's one suggestion, just aim your telescope midway between here if you don't have a go-to system, and you can start finding some of these galaxies from a dark sky location at the dark of the moon. And if you want to head up into Coma Berenices, which is the L-shaped one, just make note of this Gamma Coma star here. And if you start here, you can look for, let's bring these back. And this is just a distance of 5 degrees. And there's your whale and hockey stick galaxies. So you can do tricks like that in the sky. All right. So with that, I'll wrap up. I'll list a number of sort of easier targets in the notes, including some fertile gardens to look at, some spring buds, some spring bulbs, some blooms, some globular clusters, some double play double stars, and some hit single bright stars. And with that, whoops, I'll say thank you.
Hey, it's Blake here. I've been monitoring the YouTube chat, and I don't see any questions from the crowd. I've nudged them a couple of times, so I think you're off the hook, Chris. I was going to ask you about updates on SpaceX, but you talked about that, so that'll be exciting if they go with humans at the end of the month. Oh, I do have a question for you. I'm asking for a friend. Is Venus and Jupiter going to make a happy face with the moon?
Oh, so glad you asked. No. Let's see what I can find for you here.
For people not in the know, this is sort of tongue-in-cheek. My question here, people have been sharing a new internet meme that Venus and Jupiter, which Chris is pointing out right now, are going to be near the moon to make a happy face, but you can tell right away that's been Photoshopped.
That's right. I had seen it proposed for May 12th, so I went ahead and looked at May 12th, and that's of course that Saturn, Jupiter, Moon grouping that I mentioned in the talk. The closest I could get to this kind of thing is a few hours after the Moon and Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter and Saturn have gotten to the daytime sky for us. Folks that live further west can see a sort of a triangle form of those. But yes. Please don't share that if somebody sends it to you, or if you want to comment on it, comment that your favorite astronomers have said that it's not true. Thanks.
Okay, that's it for questions. Thanks.
All right, very good. Thank you so much, Chris, for a great presentation as always. You've covered just about everything for the month to come. We'll move on to we'll move on to our next speaker in a moment. Our next speaker is Phil Groff. He's our new RASC Executive Director, but we'll need a moment to get set up. So we'll be right back. All right, and we're back, and here's Phil. Take it away.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm really enjoying the presentation we've had so far. I'm not only your new executive director as of last October, but I'm also a fairly new member of the Toronto Centre as well. This is my first Toronto Centre meeting, and so I'm excited to be here for that reason as well. Really enjoyed Chris's presentation, as I always enjoy Chris's presentations when he's doing some of the work for us for the national office with some of the daytime astronomy sessions we've been running recently. Anyway, I'm taking this opportunity to visit you and introduce myself and introduce a little bit of what's going on at the national office. As part of a campaign, some of you may have seen me mention either in the bulletin or in some of our other publications, trying to go across the country and visit as many centers as possible in my first year. In fact, I'd made sort of a resolution that I would visit every center in the country in my first year, and things were looking good. I was managing to book an awful lot of travel, and I was very excited about that. And then the world changed. And so I'm not able to travel right now, but I'm happy to be able to come to as many centers as I can virtually. And so this is exciting because this is my first virtual center meeting that I'm getting to present at. Anyway, once again, my name's Phil Groff. You notice the PhD behind my name there. My doctorate's not in astronomy. I just play one on TV. I'm not an astronomer. I'm a psychologist, actually, by training. But I have spent almost 15 years running national and provincial not-for-profit and charitable organizations. And so it's that experience that brought me to the RASC. And so hopefully I'll be able to share some of what I've learned working in other charitable organizations with this organization. I am, however, a lifelong fan of astronomy and a devotee of all of the physical sciences, and so it's just a thrill to be part of an organization that devotes itself to public education and awareness and just the joy of learning and sharing what you've learned about the natural world. And I'm, again, thrilled to be here. So let me just take you on a bit of a tour now, not of the celestial glories that Chris just shared with us, but some of the very earthy, unfortunately, minutiae of the administration of the society, which I know sometimes people have questions about. And I know that sometimes the national office can seem very distant, even from a place as relatively close to us as the Toronto Centre. And so that's why I'm actually happy to be able to share some of these slides with you, just to talk a little bit about how the organization operates, how we're doing financially, because I get questions about that all the time. Where your membership dollars go, I get questions like that all the time, and also just a little bit about what we're doing now, what you can be looking forward to in the future, and then hopefully just answer some questions you might have still for me. But just to remind us all of what we're doing here and who the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada is. I've thrown our vision and our mission up here on the screen. Those should be familiar to folks. And they really play out in 5 basic areas that we at the national office take as our strategic objectives for the organization, and that the board of directors certainly tries to sort of deliver on. And that's first and foremost a value to our individual members. We try to support each person who joins the society and make sure they're getting value for their money, and that whatever it was that drew them to wanting to be part of this national society, we're still providing for them. Secondly, of course, most of those members join centers across the country. We have 30 of them, and 29 and one almost center across the country. And we want to provide value to the centers in performing their mission, because after all, it's in the work of centers like Toronto where the rubber really hits the road. And it's your operations that are most uppermost in the minds of many of our members. And so that's why we like to provide what value we can to centers as well. Third is our value to the general public. You know, we are a national charitable organization. We're a royal society, and we're a go-to source for information on astronomy. And when people are seeking sort of credible information about the night sky and about stories they may have heard about, comets about to hit the Earth, that sort of thing, we feel we have a certain value we can provide to the public by doing public education and outreach activities, and in general, some advocacy for topics like dark skies and other issues that are of interest to our members. Fourth, we have a value to the scientific community. We maybe haven't been as strong in this area in recent decades as we were, say, before CASCA separated itself from the society and the professionals kind of went their way and the amateurs went our way. Although we do still have, and this is sort of unique amongst astronomical societies in the world, a fair number of professionals still part of our amateur society. And thus we provide a value to the scientific community by providing outlets for some scientific publication. We of course publish the journal, which is Canada's only peer-reviewed journal of astronomy. And of course we have other opportunities, speaking engagements and such, that allow the scientific aspect, the more professional scientific aspect of our field to prosper a little bit. And so that's another area we try to provide value. And all of this, of course, it depends upon our being financially sustainable. And of course, that's my major headache on a day-to-day basis, and what I'd like to share a little bit more with you going forward. All of this happens under the leadership of a board of directors that are in turn governed by bylaws, by a policy manual, and by the regulations governing not-for-profit corporations in Canada. This is the structure of the Royal Astronomical Society. In case you may not be as familiar with it, there's going to be a test on this slide in a few minutes' time. So you might want to take some notes and commit this to memory. But anyway, it looks more intimidating and complex than it is. But really, what it comes down to is, as I said, we've got our membership spread across 29 centers, soon to be 30, hopefully. Those centers speak through a national council to our board of directors, which is actually in charge by law with the governance of the society. The directors have a fiduciary responsibility for the organization and also serve as chairs or members, at least at large, of important standing committees that do a lot of the work of the organization. After 150 years, we still have as our strongest asset a huge volunteer base, and the organization is still run, as you know, Toronto is a perfect example of this, by a huge core of volunteers. And a lot of the work, even nationally, gets done through these volunteer committees. I want to tell you a little bit about the group over here, however, which is a group of people I get to work with on a daily basis, less face-to-face than I used to before 6 weeks ago, but we still get together through Zoom, as many of you do in your work. And so just to introduce them, you've already heard from me. Some of you, I'm sure, have had to deal with Renata, our accounting manager, in the past. She's really the organizational memory of our office and has been around the longest of anyone, been through many different boards and many different executives. So Renata is someone I'm sure you've dealt with, if nothing else, when having some difficulty with getting your credit card payment to go through or something like that. Helping her out in the office is Adela, who's our membership coordinator and office administration coordinator. And two of the other young people that work with me in the office on a daily basis are Eric Wickham, who's our marketing and communications coordinator, and with his marketing communications committee is handling a lot of our channels of communication right now. And Jenna, our outreach coordinator, it says youth outreach here, although really her reach is much greater than that, who's become, I think, very prominent to a lot of our members recently through a lot of her outreach activities she's been running for the COVID virus period. And of course, we work with a number of contractors as well. Most notably, we've got a fundraiser, Lisa, who's just wonderful. And that's really sort of the professional staffing side of the organization to complement everything that's being done by all the volunteer base. So let's talk about money, because I know people always want to ask me some questions about the society's finances, how we're doing, and really, where does the money come from? Where does the money go? So just to give you a bit of a picture here, I'm showing you in both these slides the 2019 budget, what our eventual year end looked like as audited. These are fresh audited numbers that you'll also see in the annual report that just went live today. And of course, our budget for 2020 to give you a sense of what we are forecasting for this year. And as you can see, Revenues for the society come from three major sources. There's our membership fees, which of course are one stream. There's our publications. We're a quite large, powerful publishing house. As you can see, even last year, not doing as well as we'd forecast, we're still a $250,000 a year publishing house, which is pretty good in Canada, and that's not taking into account Sky News. And then there's our donations and grants, and those make up an increasingly large share of our income at the office. You can see last year we did very well in terms of our investment income, much better than we'd forecast. However, one of our investments did not do as well as we'd hoped last year. We were forecasting a loss with Sky News, and we got a loss, albeit a much larger one than we'd anticipated. There were some major shakeups in the publishing industry as a whole, and some major cost increases that had to be accounted for. And as a result, we lost some money on Sky News. But the important thing to note is that number that you see there, that's last March. Sky News is on a different fiscal year than the rest of our organization. Sky News is a business that runs from April to March. It's a standalone for-profit company. And so last March, it was at its worst point. Since that time, with the guidance of a professional publishing consultant, we've completely revamped the team at Sky News, restructured the organization, and we were confidently predicting that for 2020, we'd have a break-even year as opposed to having a loss as we had for the last 2 years at Sky News. It looks like we're actually going to be more on the positive side, close to a $40,000 profit as of the end of March, and thus the 2020 number for Sky News. So we've managed to turn the corner there quite well. Then we've got the expense side of things. And really our expenses go to four major pots. We have our member services, and those are things we do directly to support individual members. We have programming, and in particular, you can see the top line of programming, which is public and center outreach. So that's all of the materials that we produce for the centers, all the things we ship to the centers, and thus center support really comes under that line. We have publications. I mean, they're a great source of revenue for us, but they're also a cost. There's all the printing, there's the honoraria for the huge number of people who are involved in producing the various publications of the organization. And so, while it is a great source of funding for us, it's also, of course, one of our cost centers. And then national operations are kind of the fourth side of things, and that covers everything from like insurance and just keeping the lights on and having a building where the staff can operate, things like that. So that's really the picture of where the money goes to. Basically, you've seen where it comes from, and I guess the take-home message of these two slides are that for 2020, of course, we had forecast a quite rosy picture, even with making some very conservative estimates for our income and some, again, conservative, that is to say, high estimates for our expenses. We were nonetheless forecasting making money as an organization this year. We were forecasting being in the black by about $18,000. And then, of course, the world changed. So we are doing everything we can to shore up our finances now, and we are operating still, even though we're operating from home offices and such, as are many of you. Some of our sources of income are looking a little softer than we had hoped for this year, especially things like our investment income. As everyone knows, the stock markets are not doing what we'd hoped they might do this year. But we're still cautiously optimistic, and we're trying to control our expenses at least as well as we're able to control some of the losses we're suffering on the revenue side of things. So we're still cautiously optimistic that we're going to produce at least a break-even year, preferably, hopefully even a year with a small surplus at the end. So having talked about kind of the nitty-gritty of the administration, I'd like to take us back to the kind of 30,000 foot mark now and talk a little bit strategically about the organization, and then finish up with some fun things about our programs and where we're at and where we're going. So when I joined the RASC back in October and was able to talk to a lot of people from across the country, talk to a lot of people on the board, past board members, my predecessor, I got to spend a great month shadowing Randy around and sort of learning the ropes as he was departing the organization. And it became clear that there were a number of challenges facing the RASC, and the good news and the bad news are the same in this case, which is that they're the same challenges facing every membership-based association on the planet. Like, it might surprise you to know that some membership-based organizations that you would think have no risk involved in what they do, nonetheless actually do. For example, the American Bar Association is hemorrhaging members right now. Now, there are more lawyers than ever in the US, but the American Bar Association is hemorrhaging members. So this is a challenge that every organization is facing. And it comes down to all of these things you see on the slide here, namely challenges of time, value expectations, the changes of market forces, generational differences about what people expect a membership means, and how people want to participate in an organization or in a hobby or in an activity, competition for many other potential outlays of cash in people's just shrinking disposable income budget, and of course our disposable time budget for hobbies and activities, and so these are challenges that everyone's facing. No different for us, and I'm sure those of you who've been around for a long time recognize everything on this list here. The good news is that the organizations that have learned to survive these challenges in recent years are all doing so in the same way, and there seem to be 5 basic best practices that organizations are using to get past a lot of those challenges. And really, they come down to things that were already well underway by the time I joined the organization, and that we're continuing on with going forward. First of all, the notion of overhauling the governance model and committee operations. Every organization that has survived the challenges I just outlined for you there has done so by professionalizing, by going to a board of directors from some sort of an advisory council model. Several organizations I've been involved with in the past have been going through exactly that same transition that the RASC went through just a few years ago. And that's a necessary stage in order to get to a place where the organization can be financially sustainable and then fulfill its mission and vision. That involves empowering the management and the staff, and making sure you've got trained professional staff to take on some of the functions that volunteers used to do for you. You need to really look at who your members are, where your membership is shrinking and where your membership is growing, and who wants to be a member now and why, and what is it that you need to do to serve the changing face of membership, because organizations have to grow and evolve over time. And that means also rationalizing the programs and services that you offer to those members so that you're continuing to be relevant in people's minds. And all of this, of course, has to be served by a robust technology framework, because we all have to be able to do more with less. And the way to do that, where you get the efficiencies, are by having really good technology supporting you underneath. Some of these things, I'm not going to go through all the examples of where these things are happening in the RASC right now. If people want to ask me questions about it, I'll just say, for example, on the technology framework front, some of you have already heard from me on this. We're in the process of revitalizing and rebuilding the infrastructure of the organization that lays behind our website, so that our membership database and our online store and our ability to serve the centers and members will be much better 4 months from now than it is currently. The software is really aging, and it's aging not in a very kind way. Another example of that is where we see our listservs are starting to become increasingly vulnerable, and we see problems with the server there. All of that's being overhauled, all of that's being fixed, and within the next 4 to 6 months, I'd say, you should see hopefully a newer, faster, more efficient organization that you'll be able to get the information out of that you want and need much better. So I thought I would just take a moment to show you some faces, because I know many people know members of the board, many people know members of the staff quite well, but not everyone does. And as I was touring around to visit the various centers, I wanted to, well, what happened to my pictures there? Oh, there we go. I wanted to take a moment to actually show some photos. Just taking a while for my screen to update here, and I precipitously pressed the forward button to put some faces to some names, so you get to know who's serving you. This is taken at a meeting that we held in early March, the very first weekend of March, here in the Toronto offices. The board all flew in. Twice a year we try to have face-to-face meetings and such. The rest of the time we do it remotely through Zoom because of course our board's spread across the country. But this was a chance for us all to get together, spend 2 days, heads down, really working on tackling a couple of major issues. It was also just a great time for us to get to know each other better still. I was fortunate that I joined the organization just before the last of those 2-day meetings. So this is the second one I got to be involved in. But the faces you see on the screen here are faces I'd like to just briefly point out to you all. For those of you in the Toronto Centre probably, of course, know Michael Watson. He's a director for many years. He's also sort of the attorney that serves as counsel for the organization. You know our past president, Colin. You know our current second vice president here, Charles. Our treasurer, Catherine. Our current president, Chris. Robin is our current first vice president, likely to be our new president as of the AGM this coming month of June. And of course, our secretary, Eric Briggs, also should be familiar to members of the Toronto Centre. In fact, I happen to know he's in the meeting right now. So that's our board. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to sort of put faces to names in the past, that's a chance for you to do so. And then I just wanted to show you a couple of images here from that 2-day meeting so you can see some of the staff as well. And again, I'm not seeing the pictures up here on the screen. All right, we'll just move on. For whatever reason, those pictures did not want to display. So I'm just going to move ahead and talk a little bit about some of the programming that we're involved with right now. Some of you are familiar with this, I'm sure. Since the world changed 6 weeks ago or so, about a week and a half, 2 weeks after that board meeting I was just telling you about, we've had to make a number of changes to the way we do things. And one of the things that's happening, of course, are our center meetings going virtual like this. But not every center's been able to move as quickly on that as Toronto has, and not every center feels confident to hold meetings virtually. So we wanted to make sure that there were options out there for our 5,000 members across the organization who may not even make it to a virtual center meeting. And so we started producing some new content that we could make available to people virtually, and I hope people are taking advantage of some of these. We have our Insider's Guide to the Galaxy for those who enjoyed Chris's presentation just before I came on here. Every Tuesday, he and Jenna Hines are doing tours of basic astronomy concepts using tools like Stellarium. In fact, just this last Tuesday, they went through a number of different tools we could all be using to enhance our observing. On Mondays, and this is for members only, we have a tour of the Explorer's Handbook. This, of course, has been RASC's flagship publication for almost 100 years now. And for those who receive it every year in October and open it up and see tables of numbers and calculations and graphs and get a little confused or intimidated and then just put it on their shelf, this is an opportunity to hear directly from the contributing editors to the various sections of the Explorer's Handbook the best way to approach the material that they're offering to you, and some real tips and advice about how to get the most out of that book. Now, some of the folks I know on this call are old hands at observing, and the Explorer's Handbook's basically a Bible to you. You're able to read it effortlessly. But for some of our newer members, myself included, we hope that this will be a great opportunity to open up that aspect of the organization to folks. Since star parties are difficult, and some folks may not have the confidence or the skills or the ability to go out and do observing on their own yet, we wanted to offer a collective star party that we could all virtually attend. And so every alternate Wednesday, We're doing that in the evenings. We started late, 10:30ish Eastern Daylight Time. That's so we can at least start to catch the sundown on the Pacific Coast. The hope is that as the weather gets better and we have more and more clear skies, we'll be able to start offering live viewing through the robotic telescope as part of those star parties. And then, of course, people have been attending our speakers series, which are happening a couple of times a month. The most recent one was, of course, our President Chris Gaynor talking with the news director of the Hubble Space Telescope Institute about the 30th anniversary of the telescope. So all of this material, I know sometimes it's happening at times it isn't convenient for folks. Some of it's during the day. We wanted to do that in case students were at home and they needed some extra support. But it is all being taped and it's all available on our national YouTube channel. So go there and you can see any one of these presentations you may not have been able to see. We're also working right now on, I do not know why my photos aren't displaying. What a strange thing. This has never happened before. There should be a number of pictures here showing you some of the example exhibits from the Dorner Telescope Museum. The only one that's showing up on the screen right now that I could see is our replica of Galileo's 1609 and 1610 telescopes. But we do have a number of scopes in the office just ready for a better location to be able to display them at. And I'm going to push us ahead to a video of one of the telescope makers that people here in Canada are quite familiar with that I got to meet as part of doing a tour to collect some materials for the museum. And hopefully the video will now at least work.
It's just a matter of wanting to do something. It's not, nobody forced it on me.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it was my trademark.
Perfect.
At one point, my business card was The Man in the Moon. And I said, let's do a solar eclipse or a moon eclipse. Well, I'm Normand Follam. I'm from Pointe-aux-Trembles, east side of Montreal, east end of Montreal. People starting to ask me to make the mirror small, 8, 6, 10, 12 inches. And at one point I said, well, should be fun maybe to do just for a living. After 2 years, I felt comfy. My wife, were you comfy, Sherry, when I left my job? So this side of the shop is all optic. Grinding, polishing, figuring from 6 inches up to 50 inches in diameters. All the machine that you see are homemade, that I build all my machinery. All the testing system, all the manipulating, sucking cup to move the mirror around. So now the other side is more mechanical, assembling. Well, the oven is there. And this is the kiln, my pizza oven. So inside you got elements on the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. So it's all computer controlled. So on this side here, this is my vacuum chamber to do the coating. Homemade again.
You made this?
Yeah. Because I couldn't afford to buy one. So it took about a year to build.
Can I ask you, when you first took the air out of it, were you scared?
Oh yeah. One day I said, I got to build my own guitar one day. And then 3-4 years ago I said, well, let's try it. So I built my first guitar, the only guitar I built. I play in open mics and everything. People go nuts about the sounds. Oh wow, what kind of guitar is that? Well, I built it. You want to make me one? I said, no. It's a very good sound guitar. My dream project? Oh boy. That would be to have a place in the Rockies for my wife's horses and my observatories with a big 50-inch in there. And that's my compressor.
So that's just an example of some of the people that I've been able to meet. A remarkable gentleman as part of the traveling around creating the initial catalog for the Telescope Museum. And you can find that catalog now online. We've got sort of a preliminary catalog of some of the items, at least in the museum there. Once we're able to get back into the office more regularly, take better pictures and such, we want to have a full, at least virtual tour available of the collection of the museum until we can have a proper house somewhere that we can display things to the public. As folks know, it was Rudolf Dormer's wish that the museum be free of charge and open to all members or anyone who's interested in the history of the telescope in Canada. And of course, we'll make sure that happens and that we're able to display these things properly. I talked a little bit about Sky News Magazine and some of the changes that have happened there. I hope that folks are appreciating the tremendous work that is being done by our amazing new managing editor, Alendria Bernes. I think she and Isabel Santiago, our new design editor, have brought a whole new fresh look and perspective to the organization's magazine. And I hope that as we're moving into the 25th anniversary year of this publication, we're sort of setting the stage for what could be 25 more great years. And of course, there's that project that sort of started a year and a half ago, but has never really gotten off the ground, the Robotic Telescope Project. Some of you may have attended a meeting that Jenna Hines, our outreach coordinator, ran last fall about this to give a taste of what was going to happen in the new year with this project. And we are still on track to hopefully be able to really be running things in I would say by late June is when we should have the full program in swing. If you attended Jenna's talk, some of what I'm about to say will be familiar to you, and if you didn't, then I'll just be able to give you sort of a quick overview of things. So here we see the location of the telescope near Albury, California, at the Sierra Remote Observatories. We're in shed number 9, which you can see right here on the ground. I'll give you a close-up. Oh, no, I guess I won't give you a close-up. But that's where the telescope lives because it has great clear skies, great viewing. The goal is to make it as available as possible to all the members of the RASC. And we see that really happening with 3 different classes of membership in the telescope project for different people of different interest level. At a base level, there are going to be people who just want to have access to the data. And so we want to have an option for people to simply subscribe to get all the data produced by the astrophotography team and the science team all year on the scope, and then access to the professionals, by which I mean the professionals on the scope. They're mostly amateur astronomers, the AP and science forums. Then we want to have a second tier where people who want to join those teams and have a little bit of influence on helping to set targets for either the astrophotography team or the science team going forward. This would be your chance to do that. And in the process, you get to learn how to program runs on the telescope and how to process the data that comes out of it more fully. And of course, there are going to be some people who just say, give me the keys, I want to drive the car. We're never going to quite allow that because it's a pretty expensive car. And we don't want to have it, smashing up against the wall of the shed that it's in, that sort of thing. So you're always going to have some assistance in terms of actually getting your program run done. But there will be an option for people who just want to pay and play and pay by the hour for specific data they want to collect from the scope. That's always going to be a minority. Most of it's going to be this more publicly accessible material going forward. And I just wanted to finish with a couple of some nice pictures here. And of course, the pictures aren't displaying again, but there you can see a shot of the Horsehead Nebula. Here we have 3 beautiful shots of the Dumbbell Nebula that are not coming through on my screen. But let me just show you some of the outreach data, because 1 day a week, we are already using the scope for outreach with students across the country. And here is an example of some students collecting data from the scope to actually track the transits of exoplanets and correctly identify exoplanet targets at various star systems that they've chosen to image. Really exciting. I can't imagine having had the opportunity to do a project like this when I was in high school, and I'm sure no one else here can imagine what that might have been like. But we're hoping that we're inspiring the next generation of young scientists by creating these opportunities. So I'm not even going to go into the details about the costs and such that we sort of set for this, because again, we're not set up to start the project just yet. Probably late June into the summer somewhere. That's when it's going to be up and running. But basically, if you want data, all the data for a whole year that gets produced, $100, $50 if you're a youth member. If you want to be on one of the teams and actually sort of have some authority over controlling the shape of what the scope is doing for the year, that's $300. $150 for youth members. And if you want to book the scope by the hour on the one night a week, we're going to make it available for that. That'll be $75 an hour. The scope is only for use by RASC members. The one exception to that is our outreach night, when we work with students across the country, regardless of whether they have an affiliation with the RASC or not. So the idea is simply to cover all the costs annually of running the scope, make sure it's not a loss to the organization, but is in fact completely paying for itself going forward. Up until now, of course, it's been paid for by generous donations from various members, but we want to make sure that it actually has its own income so that it can actually be self-sustaining going forward. So again, I'd just like to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here and to speak with you this evening. And on behalf of the board and on behalf of the staff that I work with every day, and some of the volunteers that I deal with on a daily basis, and some of our contractors that I deal with regularly, I just wanted to thank you for the chance to be at this virtual center meeting, and also to leave you with this image from XKCD Comics about perhaps the center meetings we all hope to be able to get back to soon. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Phil, for a very insightful overview of the RASC at the national level. Let's go to some questions.
Hi, Blake here. Thanks, Phil. I don't see any questions right now in the live chat. I did lose my internet connection on that computer for a moment, but I don't see anything. I have one for you. I heard you got a new eyepiece.
That's true. That's true. I just got a lovely Explore Scientific wide angle 82-degree 30mm eyepiece. So that's going to be my sort of go-to sort of wide angle eyepiece for just searching around the sky. I'm looking forward to being able to plop it there in the middle of the galaxy clusters and start to see what I can find out there. Of course, I'll have to get away from the light pollution here in the city. But I did have it out just the other night. Just before the star party, the virtual star party last Wednesday. I took it out for about an hour on my little 6-inch Schmidt-Cass Celestron, and was able to look at the beautiful crescent Venus, even in just the schoolyard across the street from my home. So very happy to be out and doing some observing as well.
So, so we can blame you for the cloudy weather for the next couple of days.
Yeah, yes, I understand that every time someone purchases new equipment, that's it for the weather. I did pick up the Schmidt-Cass secondhand right after Christmas, just before New Year's Eve, and I know that's what that did in the entire first quarter of 2020. So, my apologies.
All right, thank you. That's it for questions.
All right, very good. Thanks again, Phil. All right, so our next speaker is Jerry Vila. He'll talk to us about Johannes Kepler. And let's give the tech team a moment to get set up. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and Jerry's ready to go. Take it away, Jerry.
Yes, good evening, and thank you very much for invitation. This is my first opportunity to speak at this meeting, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and astronomy in combination, and specifically about Johannes Kepler. He was born in Wilderstadt in Germany. This is the current picture, the city hall in the birthplace of Johannes Kepler. Can you hear me, I hope? Prior to his birth, there was the universe was centered on Earth, and that sort of started with Claudius Ptolemy. And here you can see this Earth in the middle, orbited by Moon, Venus. I guess the Mars wasn't discovered by that time. Then by Sun, Mars, and then all the stars. It's called geocentric view of the planetary system. That was endorsed by Church, and any planetary system would be a bit of a heresy. Then in 1543, Copernicus published his book on the revolution of celestial spheres. This proved to be a major event in the history of science. He wasn't quite sure whether this is true or not, but his view was supported by Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei, among others. However, Martin Luther did not think too much of it, and he said Copernicus was a fool. Now, enter the Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe. He was born in 1546 in Denmark. He had the best observation data for planetary motions. There was these observations were with great accuracy. Here's his picture with his neural quadrant, and of course here is the man, a man with a golden nose. It wasn't really a golden nose. He lost his nose in a duel, and it was really just brass nose on his face. When Tycho lost support from the new Danish king, he moved to Prague in 1599. In Prague, that was the capital city of the Holy Roman Empire, he worked for the Emperor Rudolf II. Here in the middle. The Rudolf II was the patron of arts and sciences. And in 1600, Tycho invited Johannes Kepler to make sense out of his planetary measurements. Now, both men argue often. Brahe was aristocratic. He treated Kepler as his assistant and not as his equal. Brahe also kept his observational data close to his chest. Finally, he gave Kepler data on Mars. That was a difficult planet to figure out. Today we know the reason. Mars has a definite elliptical orbit. Kepler replied he will have it sorted out in a month. It took him 8 years. In a process he had to invent derivatives and calculus, some 60 years before Newton and Leibniz. This is the contemporary picture of Prague, Old Town Square. At the background is the Church of Our Lady. That's where the Tycho Brahe is buried. He died after short illness in 1601. At that point, the Johannes Kepler was appointed to his position at much reduced stipend, I must say. There is a Kepler Museum of Astronomy in Prague, It's in one of the houses where Johann Kepler resided. He spent a good time of his life in the Bohemian capital at the beginning of 17th century, and it was here he carried out most of his important works. Kepler discoveries can be summed up in the 3 laws of planetary orbits that stood the test of time. I'm reading that just to make sure that I catch up on my allotted time. The first 2 laws were published in Astronomia Nova in 1609. And here comes the first interesting part, that Kepler begins to describe the planetary orbits as elliptical orbits, not a perfect circles as it was believed at that time. The second law states that the orbital speed changes with a distance to the sun. A planet covers equal area between the planet and the sun in equal time. Kepler called the unknown force that kept the planets in the orbit around the sun mysterium. Today we call it gravity. All he wrote was always in Latin. That was the language of communication at that time. So here's the first law of planetary orbit, and of course its ellipse. That was a great revelation, because the circle up to that time was considered a godly perfection. However, there are no perfect circles in the nature. Neither there are perfect elliptics, as we would later discover. The second law is that the planet orbit sweeps the equal area in equal time. Closer to the sun, the planet moves faster. The farther from the sun, the speed of the planet slows down, but this area is equal, not on this picture, but in reality. Derivative calculations are required to measure these areas. In 1619, finally, Kepler published his third law of planetary motions in his book, The Harmonies of the World. The book was published in the 30-Year War that started in 1618. It was a religious war between Protestants and Catholics. Now, the third law is most interesting. And I like the equation here that I put, and it essentially says the square of orbital period is proportional to the cube of semi-major axis. Now, this is the major axis of the orbit, and semi-major axis would be the radius. These are the minor axes. Now, again, there is a relation, that's a very specific relation. When you divide the square of the period by the cube of semi-major axis, it equals to a constant. That was a principal thing in his discovery. Furthermore, this Kepler's third law, and this is a modern notation, can be easily transferred into this equation and then further on to the famous Newton's law of gravity, where force of gravity equals gravitational constant, mass of sun, mass of planet, divided by r square. However, Kepler faced the uphill battle back in the 17th century, and that's shown in this cartoon. He says, so you see, the orbit of a planet is elliptical. And of course, the learned men were asking the question, What's an orbit? What's a planet? What's it elliptical? Kepler noted in one of his letters, "It may take 100 years before somebody will read my book." It took about 50 before Isaac Newton read it. Kepler complemented the beauty of his third law, and scientists have been complementing it ever since. Today, the Kepler laws are utilized in studying everything from binary star systems to the orbit of galaxies. Now, here again, we are back to the Earth-centric system, but these are the scientists that managed to break through it. This is the picture of Copernicus, picture of Tycho Brahe, Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and finally Newton. And of course, by 18th century, the heliocentric system was accepted. Isaac Newton didn't give too much credit to Kepler for his discoveries in astronomy, optics, and calculus. And by reading different books on that subject, I now see the reason. Newton practiced alchemy for 20 years with no results. English alchemists who worked at Prague at the court of Rudolf II were criticized by Kepler. And I think the Newton kind of remembered that. Here are the alchemists in Prague's Tower Museum. Perhaps you can recognize some. I'm the one in the middle, by the way, just in case you missed the joke. Life for Kepler and his family was not easy. During the 30-Year War, he lost his friends, some of his children died, and even his wife grew despondent and died soon after of typhoid. On top of that, his mother was threatened with torture and was barely acquitted of witchcraft. Chou, the court records noted, to the unfortunate intervention of her son, the imperial mathematician, as attorney for the defense. And after her release, she died 6 months later, after her release from the prison. I would recommend this book very highly. It's called Kepler's Witch. It's about Kepler and his discoveries and his life. And one chapter is also devoted to his mother, respectively to the Kepler's defense of his mother. She was prosecuted by the magistrate Luther Einhorn, who prosecuted 15 witches. And about 8 of them were burned. Those were the different times. In 1627, Johannes Kepler published the Rudolphine Tables. The tables are named as Rudolphine in memory of the Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor. The purpose of Rudolphine Tables was to predict the positions of the planets based on his calculations. There is also a Kepler's Museum in Wilderstadt. As I noted, that was his birthplace. During the 30-Year War, Kepler followed and worked for Imperial General Albrecht von Wallenstein, making astrological predictions, but was rarely paid on time. He wasn't into the astrological predictions, but he had to make the living. And the general needed those predictions to know when and where to go into battle. Finally, Kepler, alone on horseback, drove to Regensburg, hoping to collect fraction of his payments. There he fell ill with a fever and died on November 15, 1630, at the age of 58. Before his death, Kepler wrote, and it's is the English translation, "I measure the skies, now I measure the shadows. Skybound was my mind, the body rests in the earth." This was the epitaph on his grave outside of Regensburg. The grave vanished under the war. However, Kepler's legacy is being finally recognized. In 2009, NASA launched Kepler telescope into the Earth's trailing heliocentric orbit to discover exoplanet. Why exoplanet? Well, it was the Kepler who told us about the way the planet orbit the sun. And this is the picture of the Kepler telescope. Now, in this image, you see the exoplanet. Those are the planets outside of the solar system. The yellow ones, the yellow marks, are the ones that were discovered by the Kepler telescope, whereas the blue one are that were discovered by other means. As you can see, the blue ones line up on top of the chart, and they are about the size of Jupiter or Saturn. It's the yellow exoplanet that sort of reach down to the size of the Earth, or even lower. Now, the way the planets are discovered is that the special telescope looks at the individual star and watch for the dimming. That means that there would be a planet transiting across the disk of a star. That can measure several things: the size of the planet, depending on the amount of dimming. It measures the orbit of the planet, depending how fast it moves across. And by measuring the speed, we can also measure the distance of the exoplanet from the star. It's all in combination, and it's all reflected in Kepler's laws of planetary orbits. Now, in 2018, there was a problem with one of the solar panels, and they had to adjust the Kepler telescope by using the fuel cells. And eventually the telescope ran out of fuel. Telescope cost $550 million US. That's quite an amount. And I guess after the telescope is no longer sending us images, that means that the NASA will have to write it out or write it off. I do not know how would I write off $550 million. It's an astronomical amount, but I understand the NASA is in the astronomical business. Here are some of the key days of Johannes Kepler, that if I have any questions from the audience, I will be able to look up the dates. And now my final slide, I think I managed to catch up some time here, is to say thank you. But before I go, I would like to show you a bit of a news that was buried under the COVID epidemics, and that's about the Mars landing last year. Some of you haven't probably hear about that. NASA is a publicly funded institution. They like to release the good news. They try to stay away from the bad news, but I managed to get behind their firewalls. Please don't tell them. When they know that I operate behind their firewalls, they get all nervous and they start changing the passwords. But without further ado, I will turn on the video here. It's a very short video. It's only something like 1 minute. Again, thank you very much for your invitation. I always like to throw a few jokes into it. As you can see, they managed to land, but there was a bit of a hitch in their visit on the Mars. Thank you again, and if there are any questions, I would be glad to answer them because I really rushed through the presentation as fast as I could. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. That was a very entertaining ending. I don't think I've seen that one before. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Do we have any questions, Blake?
I'm just checking the chat. Lou asked, what is amateur astronomy like in Germany?
Oh, I thought it was that directed to me. What is the astronomy in Germany?
So the question was, what is amateur astronomy like in Germany?
I wouldn't really know exactly what that immature means, but well, they have a number of astronomical observatories like any other countries, but I wouldn't know the details, and I don't think I would be the expert to answer that question. Immature. Not quite sure what you mean. Oh, amateur. I wouldn't know.
Is there, I don't know if anybody knows, is there an organization equivalent to the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada? Is there something like that in Germany?
I do not know. I haven't lived in Germany, despite my accent. I haven't lived there, so I wouldn't really be able to answer that question. But thank you for the question.
And I just wanted to share a comment that some of our members know this. If they're not aware of it, we have a library, pretty substantial library with a wide variety of science and astronomy books. It's located at our member observatory on the Blue Mountains, so not quite accessible at this time. But the person that manages the books at the library, he let me know that we do have a copy of Kepler's Witch. So I think that book might be signed out in the future.
Yeah, I found that book very informative. That's not the only book that sort of describes the Kepler. There are other publications on the subject. But I found this one rather interesting, both from the historical point of view, as well as about Kepler's discovery and his times.
Okay, thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Jerry. That concludes the speakers lineup for this evening. I will call on our president, Ralph Chou, to take care of the announcements. I think we'll probably need a moment to set that up, but we'll be right back. All right, we're back, and here's Ralph.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. And I'd like to thank Phil Groff and Jerry Vila and Chris Vaughan for their presentations tonight. It's been a very interesting evening, so thanks very much for your presentations. Okay, let's take a look at what's going on over the next little while for our next online time. Our next online program will be in 2 weeks on the evening of 13th of May, and we'll be starting that one at 7:30 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. Our speaker is Dr. Zara Camille Marsan, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Physics and Astronomy at York University, and her topic is Hunting Monsters in an Infant Cosmos, Investigating the Greatest Star Factories in the Universe. And there's been a lot of work that she is involved with where astronomers are looking at the very first galaxies, which are apparently very big, harboring very big stars. And so it'll be interesting to see what she has to tell us about that topic 2 weeks from tonight. We'll be having another Toronto Centre online program on Wednesday, May 27th at 7:30 p.m. Sky this month will be by the well-renowned TBA, but hopefully we will have a real speaker at that time. Paul's still working on that. We also will be hearing from Blake Nancaro speaking about how to share observations and photos. And in this time of social distancing, it's certainly important to be able to know how to use various media to share what you're observing in your own time. We also have an open presentation slot available, and Paul would be very happy to hear from anybody who has a short presentation to make at the 27th of May session. So please get in touch with him. And you can post either to the forum, or he'll be providing his email in one of his announcements. You can contact him directly that way. Well, just a reminder that until the state of emergency is lifted and we have a way forward with resuming our activities in education and public outreach, we are suspending all of our public education activities across the GTA. And, one of the things that is happening now is that the EPO committee as well as council are looking at how we will be able to resume once the world allows us to, because there's a lot of different things that we have done traditionally in EPO and, things like observing sidewalk astronomy and so on, where you really can't get that close and personal anymore. And there's obviously problems like, what do you do about people looking at things through your scope? How do you disinfect? Do you want to disinfect? Do you want to even share an eyepiece with people anymore? And things like that. So we've got a lot of things that we're working on right now to think about before we can actually resume these activities. Similarly, with observing, the same kind of problem. Many of the sites that we use are closed off and no longer accessible. Just today we had a report in the email forum that both Longstreet Conservation Area and the place that Chris and others use fairly close up the Glen Forest, Glen Major Forest, are shut out. You can't get into the parking area anymore and things like that. So we have a lot of our members only and public observing events. Again, we're going to have to think these things through as to how we're actually going to be able to do those things moving forward once we're allowed to do so. However, in the meantime, we can still do things online. And as Phil mentioned earlier, we have our own online presentations that are independent of our members' presentations. So, for example, on May 9th, Saturday evening at 7:30, we are going to have a RASC-Toronto Center at the DDO online. And we have a number of speakers who are lined up for presentations at the David Dunlap Observatory in Richmond Hill this summer, who indicated that they'd be happy to present their talks online as part of the DDO's continuing education program, except in a virtual way. And so we'll be making the presentation, "We Are All Made of Stardust" by Dr. Parshati Patel, available on this channel in YouTube on May 9th. And we'll have that announced on the website, and there will be information on the forum as well as we approach that date. And we're looking at a couple of other presentations to do the same thing through the summer. Also, just a reminder that the National Office has their online speaker series, among other programs. And again, if you go to rasc.ca and take a look at the online programs there, there's plenty to occupy your time if you're not hard at work, and you can participate in those sessions which are live streamed. So that's something to get your astronomy fix as well. A reminder to the new members, including Phil, that the First Light Orientation Program will resume once the Science Center reopens. Our organizers, Charlene and Kirsty, prefer to do that as a live face-to-face activity. And there's a few more things to do in that series of talks. So they'll be getting in touch with the new members who were registered for First Light once we know when they can get together again. Okay, the other complication, of course, with all of the state of emergency is that we can't really do much up at the CAO either. So the Carr Astronomical Observatory is going to have to be shuttered until we figure out how to deal with all of the necessary things for people to share that facility. And again, we'll let you know as soon as we work something out about that. So that's pretty much it for now. Any other announcements we will post online, either as a MailChimp information to you, or we will be sending things out to you on the email forum. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, keep looking up. Hopefully we will have some clear skies, Phil's new equipment notwithstanding, and the well-known Nason effect. And we'll see you online in a couple of weeks. And hopefully some of you will take in that meeting on 9th of May. In the meantime, have a good evening, despite the rain, and we'll see you online. Thanks again, everybody. Good night.
Thank you all. Good night.